But today we're going to focus on another moment in white history with Lurie. So, for those of you who are here on Instagram, welcome. You're listening to the Lurie Daniel Favor Show on SiriusXM's Urban View. Hi, TikTok. I'm sure this will make its way over there in just a bit. But today's moment in white history. And for those of you who do not know why we would think it important to have a moment in white history, because those who say that, we're feeling disenfranchised, we're not feeling like we're being centered in the way that we should be as white people. And no one even gets to talk about us anymore. We can talk about black history, but not white history. And then when I saw that Governor Ron DeSantis banned black history in Florida, but did allow for white history, European history to be taught, I thought, that man is onto something. And because he's onto something, I just think we should join in this effort, because what a lot of us learn in school is not actually white history. It's Americana. And I mentioned this yesterday. And Americana is fine, but Americana is the myth of what happens that makes all the things that actually happened feel okay to the people who did it and the people who benefited from what they did. But that's not American history. So in today's moment in white American history, we're going to focus on Ruby Bridges. Now, those of you who know your black American history, you know that Ruby Bridges is a black woman. She's still alive today. A lot of people don't realize that, but Ruby Bridges is still alive. But on this day in history, in the year 1960, Ruby Bridges was only 6 years old. And Ruby Bridges, on this day in history in 1960, was going to spend her first day of first grade, being the first black student to attend a school that had been previously all white. This was the William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans, Louisiana. But Ruby Bridges is 6 years old. She's a little girl. She's a baby. She's a baby, someone who you could pick up and hold with one hand, quite frankly, because she was so little. And if you've ever seen pictures of her, you know just how little she is. But Ruby Bridges is a black girl. So why would we be talking about her on today's moment in white history with Lurie? Well, we're talking about her because white history is often sometimes reframed as black history. And that's good, but it's also bad because it leaves white people out. So I want to call in. I don't want to exclude. I want to call people in. I want to call you to the square. And so today we're going to focus on the white historical elements of the Ruby Bridges story. So, on this day in history, November 14th, 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, on her first day of first grade, as the first black student to integrate this school, she was on her way to school. And she was adorable. She had on a little dress, a little white sweater. She had her little bag and her lunch bag with her. And she also had 4 federal marshals. She had to have 4 federal marshals because the community of New Orleans, Louisiana, was so threatened by the presence of this little black girl that they needed to have armed guards walk her in, because a riotous mob, a lynch mob, if you will. A riotous mob is sort of the same thing as a lynch mob, but the lynch mob is actually doing the lynching. The riotous mob is just gathering, prepared to do a lynching if necessary, but not necessarily actually in the act of lynching. You got to know your white terrorism, because if you don't know your white racial terrorism, do you really know white history? You don't. So a riotous mob, which was organized by the local white citizens council. And white people, y'all need to know this because we see elements of this today. But the local white citizens council had gathered together to protest the fact that this 6-year-old little girl was going to be integrated in the school. Now, what is a white citizens council? I'm so glad you asked. So you know how the Ku Klux Klan, is sometimes seen as a hay-chewing, tobacco-spitting group of hillbillies out in the woods who just like to round up the N-words and go on to the lynching party. They're not too bright, and they spit their tobacco, and they play their little banjos, and they just sit in the backwoods, and they're often the slave patrollers, and they're the ones who are the overseers. But those are the Ku Klux Klan. They're the uneducated members of whiteness. Well, if you're a wealthy white, while you may appreciate the presence of the Ku Klux Klan, the last thing you want is to be affiliated with such unpleasantness. If you are wealthy white, you appreciate the presence of the Klan, but you certainly don't want to be affiliated with the Klan because, well, they are uncouth and they are uneducated and they're poor. And we, the wealthy whites, we would never want to be affiliated with that, even though ideologically we are very much in alignment. And so the wealthy whites decided, in order to be a part of the Klan without actually being a part of the Klan, they would create something a little more sophisticated, a little more elegant, if you will. And they called those as institutions the White Citizens Councils. And now these White Citizens Councils was really just the uptown cousins of the Ku Klux Klan that was downtown and living just across the tracks from the blacks. because they occupied the Ku Klux Klan, many of them, the poor whites, the angry whites. They occupied the same socioeconomic status as the black people. And had they been thinking, had they been intelligent, they would have recognized that they should not allow themselves to be snookered by their wealthy white cousins who benefit from poor white people and poor black people fighting against each other, so that no one is focused on fighting for the poor whites or fighting against the poor whites. Now, in 1955, just 5 years before this, Ruby Bridges, this young girl is going on to her first day of first grade, black parents in this parish of Louisiana had sued because they did not desegregate the schools. Keep in mind, the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education, which came down in 1954, said that separate but equal was not lawful, mainly because when white people decided to have separate but equal, they kept all the money. So they separated the physical buildings of the schools, but they kept all the resources, because that's what racism does. And so black people was like, all right, we separate, but like, we shouldn't be walking 10 miles to school and passing all of these white schools on the way. And then y'all got all the buses because we pay taxes. And if our taxes are going to come out of our money or out of our paycheck, and the taxes are only going to go to you, that's not equal. We want the money. Give us the resources. But the courts were like, no, you can't have the resources. We'll integrate. We'll integrate. And so that's what they did. So a year after that decision, Brown versus Board of Education, which, quite frankly, between you and me, devastated black education. We ain't never had an achievement gap until we had Brown versus Board of Education. We ain't never had 80% of white women teaching black children until we had Brown versus Board of Education. That was not a good decision. It was not good for us. Moving on. So they sued on the basis of Brown versus Board of Education to have access to school resources. And the following February, the federal court ordered the school board in this community to desegregate the city schools. Now, it took 4 additional years, but the school board and the state lawmakers basically was like, what we ain't going to do is follow the law if it means we got to send our kids in to be educated with the blacks. They didn't call us blacks, but that's basically what they were saying. So on May 16th, 1960, a judge by the name of Skelly Wright issues a federal order. And this order from a white judge, because this is a white judge talking to white people, because white people were up in arms because their white Supreme Court told them that they had to either integrate or give the resources, and they weren't going to do that because whiteness. So these are white people having a lot of battles about how white they could be. And because for them, whiteness means the opposite of blackness and power over blackness. These were serious issues. These were serious questions. And so on May 16th, 1960, Judge Skelly Wright, who is white, issues a federal order that demanded the gradual integration of the public schools, beginning with first grade. Now, keep in mind that within 10 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision had come down, more than, almost 90% of black superintendents and principals were completely unemployed and without a job. Nearly 40% of black educators were completely unemployed without a job. And those who had jobs had to go work in white schools, where even though they had decades of expertise in training black children, educating black children, they were often considered like the low staff, and they were more qualified and had better certifications than the white people there. But the white people were white. And when you're white in a white system, that's all you really need. You don't need no qualifications. Just look at all the people that Donald Trump is appointing to his future boards and to his future cabinets. These are some of the most unqualified white people the world has ever known. And yet they're going to sit in positions of power, because in the white frame of things, you can suck at everything. You can be dumb as a fucking doorknob, but you're white. And that's all you need. Moving on. So the judge issues that there has to be gradual integration. However, only 5 of the 137 African-American first graders who applied for the transfer were accepted. Only 5 out of 137. 4 of them agreed to attend, including 6-year-old Ruby Bridges. She was the only student assigned to this institution. I do think we should pause here to just ask ourselves, what in the hell were we thinking in sending our babies into these hellholes with teachers who had just the day before the child came into school were calling her all types of N-word, didn't see nothing about her that was worth educating, and were fully committed to upholding the white supremacist system in which this little girl was trying to navigate? We are the only people, and yes, it is true, this is only because we descended from enslavement and the horrors and the trauma thereof, but we are the only people who would see sacrificing our babies to integrate next to these folks who couldn't stand our black asses as a sign of progress. We got to fix that in this era, because we're going to get a chance to redo integration, because they're dismantling it right now. We got to think about these things. It's not progressive. It's not progress to sacrifice our children to sit next to whiteness. But moving on. So Ruby Bridges is only 6 years old. She can't navigate the White Citizens Council on her own, because white citizens councils, and remember, this is a moment in white history, white citizens councils were evil. Think Miss Millie from The Color Purple. I've always been good to you people. Sorry, I can't even do it with a straight face. I'm Miss Millie. I'm the mayor's wife. I've always been good to you people. Think about them. Women like her, they were in the White Citizens Councils. And the White Citizens Council was very angry. They were violent, and they were so angry and violent that they came down to that school. They had their rotten fruit to throw at Ruby Bridges. They had bricks to throw at Ruby Bridges. She's 6 years old, and these white people were in a rage. A rage. January 6th on 10. They were in a rage. How dare she? This 6-year-old little, how dare she? And so, Ruby Bridges had to have the protection of white federal troops. The National Guards, white men, had to come in and protect her from the ravages of the white people who were trying to keep her out of their schools. Because as members of the White Citizens Council, the last thing you could support would be equity. The last thing you could support would be equitably distributing the resources. Now, after she gets past the crowd, this little black girl, after she gets past the crowd to enter the school, she gets to her assigned classroom. And you know who was there to greet her? Who was waiting for her when she got inside, all excited with her little backpack and her little sweater and her beautiful little dress and her patent leather Mary Janes and her little lunch bag and her satchel that I'm sure someone in her family lovingly ironed for her and prayed over her before she left out the house and put guardian angels around her. Do you know what she found in the classroom when she got there? When she got past the White Citizens Council that was outside? It was just the teacher. It was only she and the teacher, because all of the white students who had been assigned to the integrated school had withdrawn. And they withdrew because their families were busy building up religious schools that would be run out of their white churches. And these religious schools would then seek to have funding that used to go to the public school that they all attended, diverted from the public school and instead sent to their religious schools where they could be as racist and white supremacists as they wanted to be. And they called that funding transfer school vouchers. This has been another moment in White History with Lurie. Sponsored by, I shouldn't say sponsored by, but informed by the amazing folks at the Equal Justice Initiative who have a daily calendar that show you exactly what was happening on this day in history. I highly encourage all of you to sign up for it. It's a free service. Shout out to Brian Stevenson, one of my favorite law professors who created the Equal Justice Initiative. But it's important that we do hear the call. White people have been excluded for far too long. And that Americana we learn in schools, that's not it. That is not white history. And white people deserve to have their history taught. And I, for one, am here to make sure that happens. Bye, Instagram. 866-801-8255.